Welcome back to True Crime Cases. Remy had spent 33 years believing in the life she had built her marriage to Gabriel. A successful and well-respected businessman had always seemed solid. They had raised children, faced hardships, and built a home that radiated stability. Never once had she questioned the man she shared a life with. But on the evening of their 33rd wedding anniversary, reality shifted. The night began as a celebration, a candle-lit dinner, heartfelt toast slaughter. But then the phone rang, a small, insignificant moment, but one that would change everything. Gabriel stiffened at the sound, his eyes darting to the device as though expecting something ominous. He pushed back from the table, muttered a half-hearted excuse, and disappeared into the next room. Remy watched, confusion twisting into unease through the partially open door. She caught snippets of his voice, low, urgent, clipped responses. He wasn't simply speaking, he was negotiating, perhaps pleading. Minutes passed, and when he returned, his expression was tight, his smile forced. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up his wine glass, his gaze no longer meeting hers that night. Remy lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Gabriel breathed steadily beside her, seemingly unbothered, but she couldn't shake the feeling. For the first time in her life, doubt crept into her mind like an unwelcome shadow. She thought back to the unexplained late nights at the office, the business trips that never seemed to line up, the hushed phone calls when he thought she wasn't listening. Alone, in the dark, Remy felt it settle deep inside her, a whisper of suspicion that would soon become deafening. She turned her head and studied his sleeping form. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with was hiding something, and she was going to find out what it was. Remy woke up with a sense of unease, the weight of last night pressing heavily on her chest. The anniversary that should have been a celebration had instead planted a seed of doubt that refused to be ignored. Memory of Gabriel's tension, the way his fingers had trembled around the stem of his glass, the way he had avoided Harry's. It all swirled in her mind like a storm that refused to settle. She moved through the house, mechanically preparing coffee, staring out the kitchen window at the garden she had tended for decades, but the warmth of familiarity had faded. Something had changed, and she knew it wasn't just in her mind. Gabriel's behavior over the next few days only fueled her growing suspicion. He had always been meticulous, structured, a man who followed a routine with precision, but now there was a shift. His phone, once left carelessly on tables and counters, was now always in his pocket, always face down, always silent. Calls came and he would step away, speaking in low, deliberate tones. Before quickly ending the conversation, Remy watched him more closely, studying his movements, the way his shoulders stiffened when he thought she was near, the way his responses to her became clipped, distracted, as though his mind was somewhere else entirely. And maybe it was. The breaking point came on an otherwise ordinary morning. Gabriel was in the shower, the sound of rushing water filling the house, and Remy, driven by an instinct she barely understood, found herself standing in his office. The room smelled of his cologne, the faint trace of cigar smoke lingering in the air. She hesitated only for a moment before stepping toward his desk. Papers were stacked neatly, files arranged with usual precision. But as she ran her fingers over the surface, something caught her eye, a name. Jennifer Harris. The letter stood out on a financial statement, a name she didn't recognize, yet it sent a chill down her spine. Heart pounding, she scanned the document, her fingers trembling as she flipped through pages of transfers, deposits, and withdrawals. Large sums of money moved between accounts, offshore locations, coded transactions she didn't understand, but knew weren't normal. Then she saw it. The old newspaper clipping tucked away in the drawer, a woman's face missing. Jennifer Harris had disappeared years ago. Remy's stomach twisted. Why did Gabriel have this? Why wash her name on financial records in his possession? She didn't have time to think. She grabbed her phone, snapped photos of everything, and shoved the documents back into place. Just as the shower stopped running, the pipes groaned, water ceased, and she slipped out of the office, heart racing. Just as Gabriel stepped into the hallway, towel draped over his shoulders, eyes meeting hers for the briefest second. Did he sense it? Did he know she had been in his office? She forced a smile, forced herself to breathe, forced herself to act normal. But the weight of what she had seen pressed down on her like an anchor that evening. She sat across from Gabriel at the dinner table, watching the man she'd shared her life with, and she no longer recognized him. The doubt had grown into certainty. He was hiding Something big, something dangerous. And she was going to find out exactly what it was. Remy knew she was running out of time. The moment she had seen Jennifer Harris's name in Gabriel's files, everything had changed. Doubt had turned into certainty, suspicion into fear. The man she had trusted for over 4 decades was hiding something monstrous, and now every movement, every glance, every step he took carried a weight. She could no longer ignore. She'd spent the past few nights barely sleeping, her mind racing, piecing together every inconsistency, every unexplained absence, every glance over his shoulder. And then there were the phone calls, always hushed, always urgent, always ending too quickly. The puzzle was forming, but she needed proof, something undeniable, something she could put into someone else's hands. Before it was too late, she bought Asmol recording device, her fingers trembling as she tucked it beneath the books in his office, making sure it was hidden but perfectly positioned. If he was involved in something dangerous, he would talk about it, and she would have the evidence. That night, while Gabriel thought she was asleep, he entered his office, closed the door, and made a call. Remy lay in bed, every muscle tense, the silence of the house amplifying the sound of her own heartbeat. The next morning, while Gabriel was out, she retrieved the device and played it back. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but the words were unmistakable. They're pushing harder. They want answers. Them. Honey is still missing and they don't believe me. A long pause. I need more time. The reply was too muffled to hear, but she didn't need to. The meaning was clear. Someone was after him. Someone powerful. The moment she heard it, her hands turned ice cold. This wasn't just a hidden account, an affair, a secret from the past. This was dangerous. This was life threatening. And now she was caught in the middle. The next day, she made a decision that changed everything. She followed him. Gabriel had told her he had a meeting with an investor, something routine, something harmless, but Remy knew better. Now she waited 15 minutes after he left before grabbing her keys and getting into her car. She stayed a safe distance behind, watching as he navigated through the city, past his usual office, past familiar places, until finally he stopped an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Remy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She parked a block away, watching as he entered through a rusted door, glancing over his shoulder before disappearing inside. Her stomach twisted. Something was happening in there. Something he didn't want her or anyone to see. 20 minutes passed before he emerged. He wasn't alone. A black SUV had pulled up, sleek tinted windows reflecting the dull streetlights. A man stepped out, tall, built like a soldier, and they exchanged only a few words before Gabriel handed him a small envelope. The man opened it, glanced inside, nodded, then turned back toward the vehicle without another word. Gabriel lingered, rubbing his temp, pacing for a moment before getting back into his car. Remy sank lower in her seat, as she had seen enough when she finally drove home. Her mind was racing, the recording, the money, the secret meetings. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. She needed to talk to someone who could help. That evening she met with Mark Stevens, the retired detective. Someone she could trust. She showed him everything. The recordings, the documents, the photos she had taken. At the warehouse, his face darkened as he flipped through the papers. This isn't just fraud, he finally said. He's in deep. And if he's dealing with the people I think he is, you don't have much time. Remy swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had spent 33 years by this man's side, but now she realized he was a stranger, and if she wasn't careful, she could be his next mistake. Remy barely recognized the life she was living. Every move Gabriel made now carried the weight of a hidden agenda. Every night felt like a countdown to something she couldn't yet name them. And she had loved and trusted for decades, had become a stranger, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. He was growing more paranoid, more erratic. His phone never left his hand. His briefcase was locked, and his words were sharper, measured, careful in ways they had never been before. She knew he suspected something. He had caught her watching him too many times, had noticed her hesitations when he asked where she'd been. The moment she found the hidden bag, she realized she had no time left. It was late when he came home, his tie loosened, the exhaustion on his face deeper than usual. She watched from the hallway as he moved to the bedroom closet, his hand sliding inside, pulling something free, a black leather duffel bag. He unzipped it and Remy's breath caught in her throat. Bundles of cash, neat and crisp, stacked beside a passport. That wasn't his. A different name. A different identity. He was running panic shot through her. If he was leaving, what did that mean for her? Had he realized how much she knew? Had he decided she was a liability? She forced herself to stay, silent, to move carefully, to pretend she hadn't seen anything at all. The next morning, Gabriel sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched, his fingers tapping a slow, calculated rhythm against the surface. "I'll be out of town for a few days," he said, his voice light, but his eyes watching her reaction closely. "Business?" Remy nodded, her hands gripping the counter behind her. "All right." He didn't smile. He just stood, adjusted his jacket, and left. The moment the door closed, she exhaled, her body trembling as she ran to the closet, pulled out the duffel bag and threw it open. Everything was still there. The cash, the passport, the unmarked envelope filled with what looked like account details. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. Mark Stevens picked up on the first ring. "He's running," she whispered, her pulse hammering. "And here ours. He has money, a new identity. He's leaving." There was a long pause. "Get everything you can," Mark said. "Meet me at the station." Remy didn't hesitate. She grabbed her purse, stuffed the documents inside, and ran for the door. But as she stepped outside, her phone buzzed in her hand, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "You think you can stop this?" The voice was calm, steady, chilling in its certainty. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't Gabriel, it was someone else. Someone who knew. She didn't respond. She just hung up and ran to her car, her breath coming fast, her mind racing. As he pulled away from the house, she caught sight of something in there. Our view mirror, a black SUV parked down the street, watching, waiting. Remy's fingers tightened around the wheel. She had thought she had time. She'd been wrong. Whatever Gabriel was caught in, it was bigger than her, bigger than him. And now she had just painted a target on herself. The trap had been set, and she had walked straight into it. Remy's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The black SUV in the rearview mirror didn't move, but she knew. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching, waiting for her next move. Her breath was shallow as she turned the corner, trying to steady herself. She had to get to Mark. She had to get to the police. She'd spent decades believing in a lie, but now she understood the truth. Gabriel wasn't just hiding secrets, he was drowning in them, and the people he was involved with weren't going to let him walk away. And if they knew she was looking into him, then she was already in danger. She kept driving, weaving through traffic, glancing in the mirror every few seconds. The SUV followed at a distance, never too close, never too far, always keeping pace. Remy's mind raced. Did Gabriel send them, or were they watching him too? The thought made her stomach twist. She reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against the documents. She had taken bank statements, offshore accounts, fake passports, enough to bury Gabriel for life. But was it enough to save hers? The police station was just ahead. But as she approached the intersection, the light turned red. She slammed the brakes, her heartbeat thwing in her ears. The SUV stopped behind her. The air in the car felt suffocating. Her phone rang, a block number. She hesitated, then answered. "Turn around," a voice said, smooth, unbothered. "Go home." Remy swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. "Who is this?" Silence. Then, "You don't want to do this." A chill ran down her spine. The light turned green. She pressed the glass, but her hands trembled. She wanted to believe she had control, that she could still make choices, but the truth was she had stepped into something much bigger than she had ever imagined. She didn't hang up. She just listened to the silence, to the quiet threat hidden in the static. Then the call ended. The SUV didn't move. Remy kept driving. When she pulled into the police station parking lot, she expected the car to follow, to try to stop her, but it didn't. It stayed at the intersection for a long moment, then slowly turned and disappeared down the street, a warning, a reminder they were letting her go for now. Remy didn't stop to think. She grabbed the files, got out of the car, and walked straight into the station. Mark was waiting for her, his expression darkening as he saw her face. "They know," she said, voice barely above a whisper. She handed him The documents watching Ash's eyes scanned the pages, his jaw tightening. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered. He turned to the officers nearby. "We need to move fast," but Remy wasn't listening. She was thinking about the call, about the SUV, about what came next. She had done the right thing, she had no doubt, but as she stood in the middle of the station, feeling the weight of years of deception crashing down on her, she realized something else. This wasn't over. It was just beginning, and whatever Gabriel had done, whoever he had betrayed, they were coming. Remy sat in the interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent light buzzing overhead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap across from her. Mark flipped through the documents, his face unreadable, his fingers drumming rhythmically against the table, every second stretched, each breath felt heavier. The station outside hummed with activity, but here in this room there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Then Mark looked up. "We have enough time, bringing him in," he said, his voice steady, but edged with something darker. "But if they know you've come to us, they won't." Wait, Remy already knew that the call, the SUV, the unspoken threats, they weren't warnings. They were promises she'd pushed too far. And now the walls were closing in. Mark stood, motioning for an officer. "We need a team at her house now. If Gabriel's still there, he won't be for long." The urgency in his voice sent a fresh wave of dread through her. They were already too late. Gabriel had planned this for weeks, maybe months. The hidden cache, the fake identity, the tension in his voice every time his phone rang, it had all been leading to this. He wasn't just running. He was escaping, and Remy had shattered his only way out. A call came through the station. An officer answered, his expression shifting. Instantly, Mark turned. "What is it?" A pause, then "There's been a body found." The word hit her like a slap. Remy's breath caught, her pulse spiking. The officer hesitated. "Warehouse district matches the description of Jennifer Harris." The room tilted, the air growing impossibly thin. Jennifer Harris, the woman who had disappeared. The woman whose name was in Gabriel's files. The woman Remy had assumed was still alive, but she wasn't. She never had been. Mark swore under his breath, shoving the documents into a folder. "We need to move." Now Remy followed him through the station, her legs weak but her determination unshaken. Outside, officers were already piling into squad cars, radios crackling with urgent voices. Remy slid into the passenger seat beside Mark, the city lights blurring past as they sped toward the address. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted exterior bathed in the red and blue of flashing sirens. Officers moved in waves, securing the perimeter, their weapons drawn. Mark turned to her. "Stay here," but Remy was already out of the car, her heart hammering, her mind spinning. She watched as the officers disappeared inside the darkness, swallowing them whole. Minutes dragged, stretching into an eternity. Then movement. They were dragging someone out. Gabriel, his shirt stained, his face blank, his hands bound behind his back. Remy's stomach twisted as he was shoved toward a patrol car, his eyes Mathers for the briefest moment, and something inside her shattered. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look defeated. He just looked at her, a hollow emptiness in his expression. Then he spoke, barely loud enough for her to hear. "You ruin everything." Remy didn't flinch. She just stood there, the cold air pressing against her skin, the weight of 33 years of marriage crashing down on her all at once. The sirens screamed, the city moved. The world kept turning, but Remy knew in that moment nothing would ever be the same again. Remy stood in the courtroom, the weight of everything pressing down on her, the air thick with whispers and unspoken judgments. Theatrial had moved quickly, the evidence overwhelming the prosecution. Relentless. Gabriel sat at the defendant's table, his face impassive, his eyes fixed forward, never once turning toward her. The jury had been out for less than 2 hours before returning. With their verdict guilty on all charges, the words rang in her ears, final and inescapable. She watched as the judge's gavel fell, as the BFFs moved in, as Gabriel was led away. In handcuffs, he didn't fight, didn't react, didn't even look back. He had been a man of power, control, deception, and now he was nothing more than a prisoner stripped of the life he had built on lies. But Remy felt no victory nor relief, only the crushing emptiness of a life that had unraveled before her eyes. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, voices overlapping, questions shouted in desperate attempts to capture the story of a woman who had turned in her own husband. She kept her head down, pushing through the chaos. Her hands clenched at her sides. She didn't know them answers. She didn't know anyone. Anything. She drove home in silence, the streets blurring past the city moving on as if nothing had changed, as if her world hadn't just been shattered beyond repair. The house felt different when she stepped inside, the quiet suffocating, every corner haunted by memories that no longer belonged to her. She moved through the rooms, her fingers tracing along the furniture, the picture frames, the remnants of a life that had never really been hers. The dining table where they'd shared their last anniversary, the couch where they had sat together on quiet nights, the bedroom where she had once felt safe beside the man who had spent decades lying to her. She couldn't stay, not here. Not in this place filled with ghosts of a past she could no longer bear to face. She packed a bag, moving with a steadiness that felt foreign, methodical, detached, clothes, documents, essentials, nothing more. She didn't need more. She wasn't running, wasn't escaping, wasn't afraid. She was simply done. A knock at the door stopped her. She hesitated before opening it, her breath catching when she saw her son standing there, his face lined with exhaustion, his eyes filled with something she could quite name. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "You. Thanks for watching True Crime Cases."